All right, here we go with video number 2. And I've included a link to this Washington Post article that includes this Ada Limon poem that I'm going to share as an example. And the poem is called "It's the Season I Often Mistake." And so you'll hear me read this poem like 3 or 4 times in this video. And I think in this one video, I'll do just that example. And then maybe next time I'll do another video with an example of my own poem or another poem. Okay, so we're considering how Ada Limon has ended her lines. And then we're going to really mess with her poem and we're going to change the endings just to experiment with how they end differently. And so again, it's not that one way is right or wrong. You may find the changes interesting or, beneficial to the poem, or you may think that they mess up the poem. You may like 1 or 2 examples and then otherwise prefer the original. Of course, it's a published Ada Limon poem. We're not implying that we're improving it. We're playing with it. And you could do the same thing with one of your drafts. You just take what you have as is, whether it's revised or not, and just experiment with the ending. And you could do this in so many ways. In this case, we will just shift one word to the next line and see what happens. And I'm also going to show how to make an artificial sound to kind of just emphasize the end of a line. So normally when we read from one line to the next, we don't really necessarily have like a big pause when we're reading it out loud. If you ask, several people in a given class or at a poetry reading or something to read a poem aloud, you'll find that people read it differently. Sometimes people do take more of a pause at the ending. Sometimes people will just read it more fluidly. I think a good rule of thumb is to go to the poet and see how they read it. That would be like, I guess, the true way to see the poet's intention. Other than that, there's possibilities. So I will read, so you'll have this text and I will read it once, just kind of as naturally as I can. It's the season I often mistake. Birds for leaves and leaves for birds. The tawny yellow mulberry leaves are always goldfinches tumbling across the lawn like extreme elation. The last of the maroon crabapple ovates are song sparrows that tremble all at once. And today, just when I could not stand myself any longer, a group of field sparrows that were actually field sparrows flew up into the bare branches of the hackberry, and I almost collapsed. Leaves were reattaching themselves to the tree like a strong spell for reversal. What else did I expect? What good is accuracy amidst the perpetual scattering that unspools the world? So a beautiful poem as is. We could talk about the imagery. We could talk about the metaphor. Hopefully you will reread the poem several times and just consider those things just as we are layering our craft discussion, starting with imagery and metaphor. And now we're talking about line. So she has some lines that are enjambed and some that are not, and some that are more, dramatically enjambed, and some that are just maybe more natural breaks in phrasing. And so you can take a look at just that as is. Ask yourself, where are the lines enjambed? For example, and today, just when I could not stand myself any longer, a group of field sparrows that were, okay, so just when that's an enjambed line. So we go to the next line, could not stand myself any longer. And she has a comma, so that's an end stopped line. So she has both in here. And if you look at it visually, then you'll see that the line length looks pretty similar line lengths. Okay. So next I'm going to read it making like an artificial sound with it's just a sound, but it's an artificial pause. Well, that doesn't, let's see. There we go. I have to set it on the table. It makes a nice dinging sound. So kind of annoying, but that's how we will really hear where the line ends. If you didn't have it in front of you, you would know where the line ends. Birds for leaves and leaves for birds. The tawny yellow mulberry leaves are always goldfinches tumbling across the lawn like extreme elation. The last of the maroon crabapple ovates are song sparrows that tremble all at once. And today, just when I could not stand myself any longer, a group of field sparrows that were actually field sparrows flew up into the bare branches of the hackberry, and I almost collapsed. Leaves were reattaching themselves to the tree like a strong spell for reversal. What else did I expect? What good is accuracy amidst the perpetual scattering that unspools the world? So you can do that with a poem, and of course it sounds unnatural and disruptive, but it's just simply to kind of create an emphasis for yourself to see where those lines end. Okay, and so now we get to the part where I messed with her poem. So the side note is I really recommend that everybody occasionally in some way take a paper bag, like a grocery bag or a shopping bag, cut around the length of it, and get a Sharpie and copy poems, whether your own or published poems. You can copy them as is, just because you love the poem, or you can do some of these kinds of experiments with them. You could take this from here and, you could cut and paste it and do a lot more things. You could just put it up on your wall so that you see it and read it and love it. But it's really something that's so aesthetically nice, and it's just wonderful to write on brown paper, so I'm a fan. Also, because I don't have any high-tech graphics to be able to put in a text window or anything. Okay, so what I did with the poem was I took the last word of each line, and I bumped it to the next line. So instead of birds for leaves and leaves for birds, we have birds for leaves and leaves for, and then birds is on the next line. And instead of the tawny mulberry leaves, we have the tawny yellow mulberry, and then leaves is on the next line. And I, without really doing it intentionally, I did capitalize each line, and actually most of her lines are not capitalized. I notice now that, except for the ones that are at the beginning of a new sentence. So that's another modification that I made. So I will read this, and we can consider if we like it, or if, again, if it's makes something interesting happen, or maybe in a place or two it makes something interesting happen, and then in other places it's not a good change. Okay, let's see. I'll leave a little bit of a pause. I'll try it without the sound one time. Birds for leaves and leaves for birds, the tawny yellow mulberry. Leaves are always goldfinches, tumbling across the lawn like extreme elation. The last of the maroon crabapple ovates are song sparrows that tremble all at once. And today, just when I could not stand myself any longer, a group of field sparrows that were actually field sparrows flew up into the bare branches of the hackberry, and I almost collapsed. Leaves were reattaching themselves to the tree like a strong spell for reversal. What else did I expect? What good is accuracy amidst the perpetual scattering that unspools the world. All right, so it is really interesting to do this with a poem that already had some lines jammed. And there's a couple places where I thought some, an interesting line came about. Like leaves are always goldfinches. So that's maybe something different than the tawny yellow mulberry leaves are always goldfinches. So, the meaning was maybe there in a sense, but maybe it just puts it in a little different format. All right, so if you can stand it, I will read it one more time with my water bottle bell, and that will be just about the end of this video. Yeah, I'll see if we have any closing thoughts. So, it's the season I often mistake, with the final word bumped to the next line. Birds for leaves and leaves for birds, the tawny yellow mulberry. Leaves are always goldfinches, tumbling across the lawn like extreme elation. The last of the maroon crabapple ovates are song sparrows that tremble all at once. And today, just when I could not stand myself any longer, a group of field sparrows that were actually field sparrows flew up into the bare branches of the hackberry, and I almost collapsed. Leaves were reattaching themselves to the tree like a strong spell for reversal. What else did I expect? What good is accuracy amidst the perpetual scattering that unspools the world? All right, so hopefully that gives you a few ideas of what you might do with a published poem. You could also you could also just print it and cut and paste it. That website had like these cool looking like boxes, but it printed very faint and not very big. But you could definitely just like cut and paste some text and then make it a bigger size and then print it if you didn't want to write it by hand. And so you could work with it that way. And of course, you could break up the lines of a published poem in many different ways. What if each line only had 3 words? Or what if each line was the end of a sentence? I think that she has a few periods in here. Yeah, they would be very long lines perhaps. But there's so many ways that you could just mess with a published poem, just to kind of hear the difference, and also to consider those 5 characteristics that I mentioned in the first video, how it looks visually. In this case, it doesn't change it very much visually by just moving one word. Sonically, how it sounds, this poem might sound very different. Of course, when we emphasize the break and add the bell, then of course we're kind of distorting or changing the sound even more. The aesthetic of it, I would say that this definitely has a different aesthetic, and maybe Ada Limon herself would say, that doesn't sound like her. Maybe the sound of that isn't her voice. She might say that. Semantically, perhaps it changes or just highlights certain meanings, and clarity or complexity. Is this version as clear as the original, or is it as complex, or is it less clear? All right, that's that. Thank you.